So I'll quickly flash one number on the screen. So I was asked, like, Alex, why would people would listen to you? That's why. So that number on the screen is how much money we have saved in various SPLA engagements to our clients. And I must admit, more than half of it was one very large audit. The rest of it is spread across multiple small and medium and large providers. So we know what we're doing. A very quick disclaimer that we're not Microsoft, so this presentation is not paid, endorsed. We're independent. We don't get paid for doing this. We deliver our services only to our clients. This is the only source of income for us. We don't sell licenses, as I said. So let's start with one thing that we have in the conversation with every SPLA provider. As a provider, you're in business to make profit. So, and all the other things, like we want to make the world better, we want to create a more sustainable environment. I get it, but every business needs to make money. And in the SPLA business, there are a few obstacles that are in the way of that, making a profit. And it's all very simple, but it's not always obvious, funny enough. So, firstly, undercharging for your services. Why? If you don't understand the structure of your licenses, if you don't understand, if you underpay to Microsoft, unknowingly especially, you may be undercharging your end clients for services because, well, you think these are the costs, but the costs are actually higher. And this is something we help to fix. The other thing, on the other hand, is overpaying for licenses. And even in audit circumstances, or in audits, what we have seen in every case, there is a bit of non-compliance, which is the third obstacle that leads to penalties, audit penalties, and they're pretty rough audit penalties. So if you want to know more about audit penalties, please ask a question. I'll answer that. I don't have a specific slide for it, but I will explain you how audit penalties work. We see both overpayment for certain things that shouldn't be paid for, say various products, and underpayment for other products. It's across the board. It's across the board. And another obstacle right now, just to make normal, sustainable, continuous business in SPLA, is that Microsoft is using audit results to push you to Azure. How? Basically, you get your audit results. If they're not too high, Microsoft will probably pursue the penalties. They want the money. It's understandable. But if it's more or less a reasonable number, what you may end up with is a negotiation around, fine, we're gonna forgive you this if you lift 30% of your end customer workloads and move them to Azure. And that activity is especially prominent in regions where Microsoft deploy new Azure presences. So famously, New Zealand and Australia, Microsoft's presence was expanded somewhere a year ago, maybe just a bit less than a year ago, and the audits are very active in the area. And basically the outcome there is, shall you move to Azure, please? You may want to do this. You can still do service provider business whilst using Microsoft data centers, whilst keeping your SPLA business. But essentially, do you want to? That is the question. Do you want to? And some of our clients don't want to do that. So therefore, what you need to do to mitigate that is to get your SPLA management under control. And it's not rocket science. We're going to talk about it today. That's the reason for this presentation, to kind of talk about the core things that we see are overlooked, core basic things in SPLA management in various providers that you should just tighten down to be able to get to a better place where your ROIs are maximized, when you're fully compliant, and when your bills are correct, when you bill your customers for the correct amount of money. So let's start with your obligations. And by the way, I'm just reminding you, please ask your questions. All of our sessions, they're not just pure presentations. It's actually boring just to listen to us talking. Ask your questions. If you have anything to tell, if have anything to ask, if there's anything that worries you, by all means, we'll answer them during the live. So know your obligations. And the obligations I'm going to be talking right now are those that are, as I said already, very basic, but often overlooked, and sometimes are not clear. Because, with all due respect, Microsoft didn't do a good job explaining to SPLA providers their obligations. They tried, but this is why we're having all these lives. First of all, you are responsible for every piece of Microsoft software by default. Before we even start any conversations, you need to have this thing in mind that if anything is in your data center, whether that's even colocation, whether that's even your end customer's hardware, without evidence, without specific protections in place, everything that is in your data centers is your responsibility. This piece of hardware is there. There's Windows Server, there's SQL Server, there's Office, there's remote access to Office. You're responsible, unless you put protections in place. So why I keep reminding this is that we get it all the time. Say a client receives an audit letter. And in one of the first conversations, I would put about probably 80 to 90% of the conversations with the client. The phrases that we hear are, we only support operating systems. That's fine. Nobody cares. I'm sorry. I'll be blunt. Nobody cares that you're only supporting operating systems. Whatever is in those virtual machines, unless you have specific protections in place, and they're very basic. Microsoft actually even tell you what protections you need to put in place. You're responsible for it. And I highlighted on the slide access licenses. Why? Is that, again, the average across all the audits, 80% of the penalties are not in operating systems. They're not even in SQL Server. They're in SALs, subscriber access licenses, RDS SALs, Office SALs, and whatnot.
Alex,
yes?
I've got a question. So you're saying that as a provider, I'm fully responsible. But
Mm-hmm.
what if there are specific workloads of customers that I don't have access to? I'm restricted to access those workloads, those servers. Am I still responsible for what's being installed on them?
That's one of the cases when I say when you need to put protections in place. So for that particular case, when you don't have access, say, well, again, quite often providers have government clients, and no government client, especially in military or security or intelligence, will let you onto their virtual machines. So let's talk about protections. Let's talk about that. So first thing first is, let's look at how a provider's business is structured. So you don't only have end customers. That will be easy. You may, and many of our clients do, you may also have resellers that resell your services, your partners that resell your services. It's normal to have a channel. And as I said, almost every client of ours has some sort of a software reseller partner. And then you also have other providers that may use your services, and I'll talk about how quick in probably next slide or a couple of slides from now. And they may also have their resellers and their end customers, and it's very complicated. And all these workloads may end up in your data centers, so you need to put protections in place. And the first protection you need to put in place is actually even stipulated in this SPLA contract. And when auditors review compliance, they don't only review compliance of licenses of how you report them, they also review your business for compliance with the requirements of the actual agreement, service provider license agreement. So the first thing you need to put in place is the end user license terms, EULT. It's a part of these. It's an additional PDF that you get in your SPLA agreement folder. There are lots of other PDFs, signature forms, amendments, addendums, whatever. EULT is a part of that package. You are required to have it as a part of all your contracts. It must be also included in all your reseller contracts. So when you have resellers, if you go back to this slide, if you have software services resellers, you're actually required to require them to put that into their contracts with the end customers. And that is your protection, because what that is, essentially you are the licensee as a provider. You are licensed by Microsoft to use Microsoft software to provide so-called software services. We'll get to software services in a few slides, what that means. And when you allow your end clients to access it, you sort of sub-license those licenses to them. They don't really get licenses per se, but they must agree to the end user license term. And what we see again, I mean, this is improving, by the way, but we used to see a lot of cases when providers just didn't include those licensing terms in their contracts, and therefore they opened themselves to being responsible for what the end clients deployed on the service without even them knowing that they're doing that. This document basically gives you legal protection. It is supposed to explain to the end customers if they do something nasty, they will be responsible. It's almost
Alex, basically, sorry for interrupting,
yeah, but by
but
all means,
basically what we see, and this is, I think this is the first domino that falls in compliance, is that the majority, I would say over 50% of our clients don't put a EULT into place.
Mm.
And ultimately, that is where the compliance issues start to build up. So I would even say that one of the first things that you need to go back to your business tomorrow morning is to start verifying, have you put the end user license terms in place? Is it in place where it needs to be? Who follows up on it? Where are those documents actually filed? And have you done your internal due diligence on this
Yes,
piece of information? Even
yeah,
before you go into all the next steps Alex is going to talk about regarding monitoring and managing your actual deployments and licensing. This is just, I would call it the as I said, it's the first domino. That if this domino falls, even if you've got everything else in place, everything's going to collapse.
thanks, Daryl. Yeah, and one of the frequently asked questions is, we are a public offer provider. We have a web page. People come to the web page. They order all the virtual machines from there. Additional software they order from there. We don't really interact with our clients. They order everything online. In that case, do what Amazon does: publish your contract templates, publish your end user license terms, publish user-friendly explanatory pages about licensing on the web. Make it a part of your so-called public offer. It's a legal thing. If you do that, you probably know what I'm talking about. So make sure these licensing terms are online, and any customer that procures anything online with a credit card from you ticks a box that
I
they agree
accept.
to yes, I accept. I agree to comply.
As simple as that. As simple
Yes,
as that.
and that's your protection. Then you know what Microsoft say about you being responsible is if you made all the efforts in good faith, then you don't need to. They formulate it in a way, you need to help Microsoft then resolve issues they suspect with the compliance of your end clients. So it stops being your responsibility. Then another thing, it's a frequent mistake, unfortunately, and sometimes just because there's no real visibility of what's going on certain machines and virtual machines, is there are not everything may be brought in to services providers data center, and again, this is improving, and services providers have realized in the last 2 years probably that at least the difference between pure SPLA and licensing mobility addendum. So when you have a pure SPLA and you don't have any license mobility addendum or QMTH addendum to your SPLA agreement, in that case, your end clients may only bring their licenses to the hardware that is dedicated to them. That's it. Only on dedicated hardware. If they want to deploy, say, their SQL Server license onto a virtual machine they rented from you, they want to bring their own license. There's a whole raft of requirements. Firstly, you must be a licensed mobility partner, and you must have this license mobility addendum. Secondly, they must have licenses with active software assurance. And that is regulated not by services provider user rights. That is regulated by product terms, by the document that stipulates, governs the usage of just regular licenses. That is where it's all written, not in SPER. You won't find it in SPLA. You won't find it in services provider user rights. And also, and these things you will find in your license mobility addendum, they must follow a license verification process. They must fill in a specific form, send it to Microsoft. Microsoft must confirm it. It doesn't really work that flawlessly. And some providers say, I didn't really bother checking that, specifically because we were never asked to do so. But some providers say Microsoft never actually checks it. People just send these forms. Microsoft just says fine, and. But then, if you have that form signed by Microsoft, confirmed by Microsoft, you are protected. If you don't have it, I'm sorry, you're responsible for it. If you don't follow this process, you're responsible for these licenses, not your. I mean, still, you have this first level of protection and user license term. But I wouldn't. I would be very careful with license mobility forms. Could you please specify? So Kirill is asking, could you please specify which part of which document requires us to tell our partners that their clients must also agree with EULT? Good question. So I don't think we have enough time today to look into this, but if you give me just a few seconds, I think it's where the software reseller is defined. Just a few. I won't find it this quick. I'm sorry, but it is in SPLA itself. So it is the license. It is the services provider agreement itself which stipulates that. Now, let's not waste time today. Kirill, you know where to find me. Please message me, and we'll talk about that. If anybody else is interested, please also just send me an email to ask@SAMexpert.com, and I'll guide you through that. So don't worry about that. Right. Let's go. Let's move on. So the other thing that has bitten a few services providers is they unknowingly thought, because they're licensed mobility partners, they may also host Windows 10, Windows 8, Windows 11. That's not the case. Only tier one partners, data center providers with QMTH addendum to their SPLA have a right to host Windows 11 and Office 365 products. Only QMTH providers, qualified multi-tenant hosting providers. That's it. That's the limit. So if there's anything in your data centers, if you're not a QMTH provider, and if there's anything on your shared hardware that is either Office 365 or Windows 11, you're in trouble. The only thing I can't really tell you is that there's no clear understanding of how to calculate penalties in that case. That's it. So that's another mistake. Don't make it, please. Make sure if you don't have QMTH authorization, these products are not anywhere in your data center. It's very important. Some providers ask us either can they use volume licenses for software as a services for hosting of certain things, because we also deal with small providers. Sometimes when we say SPLA provider, sometimes it may be a company So the smallest probably that I dealt with. It was a company that had their own SaaS solution. And they signed a SPLA agreement to enable publishing that so their external clients could access it and use it. In some cases, you don't need SPLA. In some cases, you may just use your volume licenses. The list of those products, though, is very short. And to simplify this, usually it's just Windows Server and SQL Server. That's it. If you have SharePoint, you can't do that. If you have any other Microsoft product, you can't do that. So there's a very short list of products that allows you to use volume licenses for SaaS and for hosting. And the other version of this product of this question is, but can we use our own Windows Server data center licenses to provide hosting? We'll charge SPLA on all the other licenses, but we have a huge surplus of Windows Server data center volume licenses. May we use them for hosting? No, you may not. So volume licenses may not be used for hosting, and just don't even think about that. So you may only use it for hosting specific SaaS solutions that you developed. I told you that example was a company that developed their own solution. It's not licensed. It's developed in-house, and no direct access to Microsoft products. In essence, remote desktop or direct access to the SQL Server database. No direct access is provided to customers. They are working with your SaaS solution that is on the web. That is the only case when you may use your volume licenses. Don't use them to host anything else. Right. So provider partnerships. This is something that's I still find is a surprise to multiple providers. And let me explain that. That is something you may use, but you need to understand the responsibilities in this case. You as a provider may use other providers' data centers to provide services. Other providers, other SPLA providers, may use your own data centers to provide services. There are even SPLA providers that have no data centers of their own. Why it eludes me? Because that's convenient to them. What's important here is you may only bring SPLA licenses, your SPLA licenses, to another data center for those products that are GCP eligible. To give you an example, Windows Server operating system is not GCP eligible. Therefore, you may not, if you use another data center, you may not report Windows Server data center. You may report, for example, SQL Server Core, because that may be brought in from your SPLA contract. So please pay attention, because we've seen mistakes when say a provider of the data center wasn't actually aware of that. They thought, okay, we have this partner. I mean, we're friends. They're our partner. They're going to report Windows Server standard, say. It doesn't work that way. So you need to be absolutely careful with understanding. This is basically the acronym you need to look for in the services provider user rights against every product, to understand if you may bring it to another data center. If it's not GCP eligible, then you may not bring it to another provider's data center. They will have to report it. You have to have an arrangement with them. They will charge you back. And by the way, another mistake that we've seen was double reporting. When a provider renting services was reporting Windows servers and also paying for the same license to another provider. And one of the things some providers asked us, well, if we move our clients' workloads to Azure, can we still do SPLA business? Sort of, because some licenses may be brought to Azure. Because if just treat Azure or Azure, whatever we call it, we call it the headquarters of my company are in the United Kingdom. I'm in the United Kingdom. We call it here Azure. So whatever you call it, you treat it as another SPLA provider. And actually, it's even stipulated in SPLA itself that Azure is one of the platforms where you may bring your licenses to. Right, let's move on because I wanna make it 1 hour only. What you must always report is the majority of the providers will have the old SPLA And the old SPLA says you need to report to Microsoft all the details of all the end users consuming over $1,000 a month. So even if you bill them in Canadian dollars, or Australian dollars, or New Zealand dollars, it doesn't matter. The threshold is set in American dollars. There's a new SPLA contract. I haven't seen it myself, so I must caveat it. I was told it exists. I was told, so a friend of mine signed it, but even under the NDA, he hasn't sent it to me. He said in his new SPLA that he signed last year, 2021, it says now they must report every end user details. So check your SPLA, check the agreement that you have. These may be a problem during an audit if they find that you're not reporting this. So this will not be an easily calculated non-compliance in regards to licenses, but this is what is called a contractual non-compliance. And the penalty for contractual non-compliance may be if Microsoft doesn't like you for any reason, they will recall your agreement and you will have to restructure your business without SPLA. And this is what's happening worldwide right now. So Microsoft is trying to reduce the number of especially small SPLA partners because they're difficult to manage, and they want people to move to Azure. What are the persecutions for non-reporting those users? So I'm going to get to that to another point here when I'm going to talk about sanctions. The persecutions for not reporting these users may be, I'm not saying it's going to happen, may be cancellation of the agreement, because that's a breach of contract. Let's make it absolutely clear and blunt. It's a breach of contract. It's your obligation. If you're not doing that, that's a bad thing. You're a bad person or a bad provider. So what you must report upon request. So Microsoft may actually request you in writing to give them all the details of all the software services resellers. So the resellers that resell your services, it's your obligation. It's written in SPLA itself as well. What you must check, and especially with the current war that we have in Europe, it's especially important. You must check your end user if your end user customers are not under sanctions or are under sanctions. And what's important is that their territory and their entities matter, not yours. So, say if they're located in, I don't want to say that, but in Russia, and they're under sanctions, it doesn't matter if your data center is in Germany. You must be sure you're not providing services to companies under the under sanctions. So Microsoft, in certain regions, runs audits that don't even audit compliance. Licensing compliance. They only audit this. This is how serious this is. So Andre has this. If this breach of contract is not material, then I would argue to MS that yes, I will comply, but no penalties, please. The thing is that if it's not material, there will be no penalties, perhaps, because these penalties are not even stipulated for things like that. But you are violating the agreement. You are violating the contract, essentially, and they may terminate it for violation. There's a termination clause. I don't think you're going to be penalized monetarily for this.
So I think it really gets down, Alex, to what's Microsoft's agenda. And usually behind every audit, there's an agenda. And that agenda could be to, as you started off the conversation, to move you to Azure. Or it could be to start decreasing the number of small SPLA providers in a specific region. So it might not be material, but it could be very painful if they do decide to take it all the way to the maximum options that they have in their toolbox. So just watch out for that. It's not always about the money.
The next thing here, I think we've come to the most frequently asked question about what are my obligations, and because all the providers are asking, But as by the way, one of the questions that you asked, Daryl, today, if I don't have access to virtual machines, certain virtual machines of my clients, what do I do? This is a very interesting topic. Very, very interesting. Because what Microsoft requires you to provide is access to servers. So firstly, I have never seen auditors actually accessing the servers. They will ask you to provide the inventory data from the servers. But if you look at how they stipulated the servers themselves, the definition of the server, a server is a piece of hardware. Virtual machines are not servers. Servers are not virtual machines. And obviously, auditors will ask you to provide all the data from all the virtual machines. Otherwise, how do we know? What's running there? Usually, with a good case, when you can explain why you cannot get access to that virtual machine, but please don't cheat because they know when you're cheating. When you don't have access to those virtual machines, and you have a ULT in place and other protections in place, you may be given like a free ticket. Fine, we don't need fine. You explain to us why you don't have access to these virtual machines. Again, by the language of the SPLA agreement, you only have to provide access to auditors upon request to the service, and service are hardware boxes. By all means, audit me. These are the virtual machines. I don't know what's inside. So you have a bit of a wiggle room there. Use it. Use it smart, in a smart way, smartly. Moving on. Customers on dedicated hardware. So this thing gets us back to what I said at the very beginning. You are responsible for every single bit of what's in your data centers. We have seen multiple cases when auditors, on behalf of Microsoft, asked providers to give any evidence, an email, a piece of agreement that confirms that the end client, I'm not even saying takes responsibility that they're responsible for the license on their dedicated hardware, that they even know about it. See what I mean? So why? Because I was in the middle of a dispute between Microsoft and the provider, and the third party, the end client, when the provider claimed that the end client is responsible for the license, and the end client said, we had no idea. In that case, Microsoft will try and recover that money from the provider, not from the end client. So make sure you have, better if you have this in the contracts, colocation contracts, so-called private cloud contracts. Make sure it's there. But if you don't, at least get a written statement, an email, anything that confirms that whatever they don't pay in SPLA, and usually you will have mixed licensing. They will bring some licenses, you will provide some licenses. Where is the demarcation line between their responsibility and your responsibility? Have that in writing, please. That's for your own sake. So obviously, when we help providers like you to sort this out, this is one of the things on the checklist, and we know how to do it. So internal use is the thing that bites some of the providers, and there's a bit of still even in the current language, there's a bit of misunderstanding of how much of how many licenses may you use for internal purposes. I would say to stay on the safe side. I always say stay below 33%, because the formula is that is actually on top of the slide, is open to interpretation. May use up to 50% of total end user usage. Total end user usage. To me, it sounds like 33% of the total usage completely. And then one of the questions we get is, how do you calculate Windows Server by the number of virtual machines? Because it's very difficult to really calculate if it's all virtualized. You just report every single core. How much do you use for your internal use? Count the number of virtual machines. That's a very simple answer. So obviously, do regular compliance self checks. We have, unfortunately, we can't make it part of this presentation. We may actually talk about it in May. We're going to have another live on this subject in May, mid-May this year, where I'd like to present. We have an internal framework of assessing maturity of SPLA compliance in providers. So, do on what we just discussed, do regular self checks. If you want a cheat sheet, so we're still working on it. It's not yet ready. A public cheat sheet that we're ready to kind of release for public use. Send me an email. Send us an email to this email address that you want a regular improvement checklist cheat sheet. Basically, just a list of things you need to look at, take care, do internal checks, invite someone like us to do external checks. Send us an email, and we'll send it back when it's ready. Then another thing, know your services. So in any audit, when you receive your audit letter, the first thing you need to do is, before you even engage in any conversations, you need to make sure you know your scope, you know your services, and I'm gonna talk about a few things that are not SPLA, and that's very important that you exclude them. So what does it mean? What you are actually licensed to do through a SPLA agreement? You're licensed to provide software services. And software services is in this slide. Let me read it, actually, because it's going to be easier if I just read from the slide. Software services means services that customer provides to end users that make available, display, run, access, or otherwise interact directly or indirectly with the products. So what's very important is that the end users actually interact somehow, or they see, they interact in terms of with the feedback or without feedback. They have some sort of access to Microsoft products. It's a very important thing. If they don't, it's not a SPLA, it's not in SPLA scope. And basically, so they access it through the internet, telephone network, private network, rental, subscription services, basis, whatever. So this is the definition. This is the definition of software services, even if you're not receiving any monetary compensation in return. So even if it's not for a fee.
I think,
And
Alex, on this, sorry for, can you go back a second? I just
yes,
want to emphasize indirectly there.
yeah,
This is something that many organizations, vendors blunder around that, because indirectly, sometimes it's very difficult to monitor. It could be coming through multiple layers, that specific access, and organizations say, well, they're not accessing my product directly, or the Windows server or the SQL server directly. They're going through various layers of applications on the way. Um, and there are ways to validate that. So just keep in mind, the back of your head, next time you do your internal due diligence, just verify if you've got any indirect access that could um, put you in a compliant position.
yeah. But with the basic provider services, like I'm just renting my virtual machines. You won't have this issue. It's simple. You're renting out virtual machines, it's fine. But the bigger your business is, and the more things you do, if supply is just a small part of your business, or one of the, I would say, enablers for other businesses that you provide. You're a large scale services provider, and this is the case with all the large scale services providers. They have business process outsourcing. At least one. It is when you do not provide software services. And examples on the slide are a fully outsourced, outstaffed process. There's an insurance company that doesn't do any and client interaction at all, and they don't even process claims. They have their office that does some HQ stuff, I would say, and everything that is customer related goes through a services provider that not only hosts the workloads and servers, they also have staff that does work for that end client. And that is what we call business process outsourcing. And in that case, if you dedicate it to a different hardware, you don't actually need SPLA for that. And it's a big mistake not to exclude those things. And these mistakes, they they happen. They happen, and they bite very, very painfully, because these are usually, as I said, large providers. So we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars or pounds or euros, and that you then have to fight back. Then you have to explain to the audience. Oh, by the way, sorry, we forgot that's business process outsourcing. Good auditors, by the way, they will explain it to you. If there's a good team on the audit, they will explain it to you. So please understand, if you have something that should not be in the scope of SPLA, make sure you understand it. Make sure you understand it. So I'm not saying you can't use SPLA, it's an option for you. But if you dedicate it, if you have this business process outsourcing, BPOs, actually, I think right now it's already a common term. It didn't used to be a common term. I've just heard from a provider in the Pacific region. He just used it in a conversation with us. BPO. We don't have any BPOs. Fine. Okay. So it's becoming common knowledge. Hosting your own software, as I said, if that's that very rare case when you have a SaaS solution that only uses products that are eligible for so-called self-hosting, you can exclude it from this plus scope if you want to. If you want to use your volume licenses for it, as long as you comply with the self-hosting terms that are outlined in product terms, Microsoft product terms, not SPLA. As I said, it's not SPLA. It's not a SPLA case. Then you, as long as the hardware is dedicated, you may exclude it from this SPLA scope. So make sure you know when you have something like it. Development for end customers. Wow. So there's no such thing as MSDN on SPLA on shared platforms. So all development, if you want to use Visual Studio and MSDN, Microsoft Developer licenses, it must be dedicated on dedicated hardware. We always say segregate production non-prod in any case, because things may change suddenly, slight change in the process, and the person who designed the public cloud environment for this or private cloud environment for this, they didn't account for a potential change in the future, and then say you designed that development to be compliant in the very beginning, and then something changed, you become non-compliant. So make sure you segregate it to avoid these issues. There's no MSDN on shared hardware. So getting back to your scope, during the audits, this becomes the headache. Really, if you don't know who knows each virtual machine, you must know that. They will ask you. The reports that auditors will put together will be centric around your end clients. So virtual machines will be segregated by the end client. So you must know which end client runs what is internal, what is external. That also plays into that rule, contributes to that rule of reporting every client that consumes more than $1,000 a month. How do you know? So you need to know, and unfortunately, we see cases when providers don't know, what certain machines belong to what end clients. Bizarrely, so make sure you have a very tight control of that. Whose is that hardware? So that's about dedicated hardware. So just know the hardware, know the scope. Is that business process outsourcing? Is that an end client? Do they bring their own licenses? Make sure you understand that scope very, very, very well. And again, scope requires consistent maintenance. you need to, I would say, let me rephrase this. Your knowledge about your scope requires consistent maintenance. You need to make sure that what you have documented actually reflects what's going on. So make it a part of your regular improvement processes. Review the scope, review every client, review every service on a regular basis. I would say probably on a quarterly basis if you're a large provider, maybe once in 6 months if you're a smaller provider. I would never advise it to be an annual exercise because things change in the SPLA environments. Things change very fast. Uh, Data, very fun part. So keep all the SPLA data safe, please, for each month. For each month, all the reporting history traceable to its sources. Even if you don't want to show it to the auditors, you will want to find it during an audit, just in case, to do an internal review, to do an exercise with a third party, with an independent reviewer before you submit your data to the auditor, to make sure that your reporting was accurate in the previous years, because that's how SPLA audit works. They calculate your compliance for each month for more than 5 years sometimes backwards. That is why you need to keep your reporting history traceable to its sources. If you are sure you have been reporting it all correctly, things change. You may deploy new hosts. You may decommission other hosts. You probably will. You probably do that on a regular basis. And sometimes for the auditors, it's very difficult to trace back to actually understand why you reported this. Say in January 2014. Oh, well, 2014 is too far, but anyway, you get the idea. If you are sure, absolutely sure that you did it correctly, if you give them that data, that makes your life easier. I would always suggest run it through a third party. Let a third party review it before you give it to the auditors. Still keep that. And what's very important is to keep the actual reports, what you send to your SPLA reseller, those reports, and any financial documents around it. Because what we find is that when an auditor comes to audit you, they will be given data from Microsoft databases, on how Microsoft sees your SPLA reporting that went through a chain, not directly from you to Microsoft, through a chain, reseller, whatever, distributor. I'm not familiar with how that works internally there. But what we see is the data from the Microsoft databases is different always to what our end clients give us. Our provider clients give us as their reporting history. And it never matches, bizarrely. And then what are you auditing? What are you comparing it to? Have your reporting data saved. Have it in a safe place. Have a dedicated SPLA tool. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a famous tool. And by the way, if you're considering using something like Snowflake, Xero, SPLA, and whatnot, I wouldn't recommend it. Not because I like those tools, but they don't work for SPLA. So you need a dedicated SPLA tool. Let's be clear. So a tool won't automate everything. However good it is, however SPLA centric it is. I can give you an example. I dealt with a provider that had a client where there were 3 layers of security before someone could get access to a piece of software. And in SPLA, it's very important to understand who is an authorized user to calculate the licenses. So they had it as some sort of SSO solution, single sign-on. I'm being very technical right now, but I hope you understand what I mean. So they have like top layer, then they have a terminal services layer authentication, and even on the file system, they have access control lists. So it's a filter. No tool will support it. So you will have to somehow extend it. You will have to somehow augment it with your own additional processes, maybe scripts, maybe certain inputs. Certain tools may have integrations with certain scripts. So let's be clear, whatever you sold, it needs to be tuned to your particular case. You can actually implement a script-based solution. Some of our clients, after an audit, they just took the auditor scripts, modified them, and built their own solution based on those scripts. These are pretty good. But make sure that the person behind your solution really knows service provider user rights. Because if they don't know service provider user rights, if they only know volume licensing, you're in trouble. Because that is another mistake. We're talking about mistakes today, how to avoid them. That is another mistake, is that sometimes we see formulas used to calculate reported figures based on the rules in volume licensing as opposed to service provider user rights. And there are quite a few differences. So the basic one is Windows Server Standard, for example. If you take Windows Server Standard, there's no 16 core minimum per server, and a license gives you right to only run one VM as opposed to two in volume licensing. So that's one of the common mistakes. SQL Server, again, you need CALs are different. Client access licenses themselves in volume license, for example, CALs, client access licenses, are additive. So you have a base client access license, and then to provide enterprise access, you need to add on top another CAL, which is an enterprise CAL. If you do that in SPLA, you'll be overpaying, because enterprise CAL in SPLA includes base CAL. Not for every product, by the way. So that's per product as well. So it's a thing that shouldn't be overlooked. If there's a reason why I put forget volume licensing as the headline on this slide, because you need to forget it. You need to relearn SPLA licensing from scratch. Right, and then how do you maximize your ROI? I haven't got that much time left, so I'll be very quick. You need to plan and you need to adjust. And there are a few tools that you can use to maximize your ROI, even basic tools available in SPLA. So firstly, maximizing return on your data center addition. So obviously, because you have unlimited virtualization rights on Windows Server Data Center, I hope it's obvious. I hope it's understood that the more virtual machines you may squeeze onto your hosts, the better. Obviously, if you scale horizontally, if you add cores, that increases the costs. If you scale vertically, if in the same amount of cores you manage to squeeze in more virtual machines, then in that case it reduces your cost per VM. And then you can balance that. Either you can reduce your end user price and be more competitive, or you can just increase your margins. That depends on what your business model is, and what circumstances you do your business. You can dynamically choose less expensive editions. SPLA is not a fixed thing. So, in volume license, you bought a data center license, you assigned it to a server, there you go. You have your data center license assigned to that server until you move it. In SPLA, you just report your consumption. So please remember that. And if you choose a tool, that must be one of the things. A tool must be able to flexibly switch from month to month. And that is so in cases when we help to manage SPLA to our end clients, to our provider clients, when we help them manage their SPLA, we always look at, is it possible in this particular month? Is it possible? It's usually built in scripts. We don't do this manually. It's built in our logic. If in this particular month, this server farm may be reported as Windows Server Standard licenses, then we'll report it as Windows Server Standard license because it's cheaper than data center. Next month, the number of VMs has increased. Let's switch to data center. The savings per month may not be that big, but in a year, 2, 3 years, it accumulates. And it's something that, you don't want to waste your money. Dedicate hardware to SQL workloads. And I mean like dedicated. If you want to have a data, you want to provide databases, or even if you have an ability to procure SQL through your online interface, your online cloud, somebody comes with a credit card, procures VMs from you, procures SQL Server VMs from you. How are those SQL Server workloads on dedicated, very powerful hardware? It needs to be planned. It needs to be calculated. It's not always economically beneficial. But again, I remind you, SPLA, you may switch each month. This month, you have enough workloads to benefit from unlimited virtualization. Fine. Report these hosts as SQL Server Enterprise at the hardware level. Sorry, I'm getting into licensing details again. But again, dedicate SQL workloads and then open that ability to yourself to switch to more economically beneficial licensing month per month. And that is why, by the way, because you have this ability to switch month per month, I always say keep reporting history, keep the logic per month why you did that, because for the auditors it may not be clear why in a certain month you suddenly decided to switch to a different licensing model. You need to be able to explain it to them. Right, so and that is it. We are wrapping up today's presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Daryl, do you want to say a few words, maybe?
I would basically wrap up with everything with SPLA works really, really well until you audit it. And I think that is today, when we look back at what's happening with audits in the marketplace, volume licensing audits have dropped dramatically, and SPLA audits are keeping at the same level as they always have, maybe slightly more, where Microsoft is introducing new data centers. So if you are in a region where Microsoft in the last 12 months has introduced a large data center or a new data center, and you're a SPLA provider, I would definitely take a good look at your business and prepare yourself, because it's just on Microsoft's agenda. And my last note, for today's presentation is, if you are under an audit or if you are wrapping up an audit, just remember that with every audit comes a negotiation. So don't be afraid to negotiate the final results first with the auditor, being PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, whoever it is. And that's the first negotiation. And once that's concluded, you have a second round of negotiations, and that's with Microsoft. So don't be wary about that. That's just part of going through the regular business conduct with Microsoft. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, you're absolutely right about the audits. The SPLA audits are not in decline. They're actually, I would even say, according to what I'm seeing, they're on the rise. And if you're a services provider, be absolutely sure you will be audited at some point. Not necessarily tomorrow, but you will be. So be prepared. Okay, so thanks everybody. And for those in Europe, thank you for being so late with us. For those in those regions where it's still a daytime, just thank you, and come again. We're going to have another live at this time of day. If it's not convenient to you, by the way, you can find us on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn. You can look up our names. Just connect to us. We don't bite. We don't sell. We never send those dreadful LinkedIn sales messages to our connections ever. It's a principle. So if you want to discuss this, by all means, let's discuss more convenient time for lives, maybe one-to-one calls. Yeah, thanks again. And yeah, as I always say, save with knowledge of licensing, but in this case, let your provider business be profitable. All right. Okay, goodbye. Bye.
Software licensing is a minefield. It's confusing, time-consuming, and often overpriced. Get it right, and it can be your greatest asset. Get it slightly wrong, and you risk being non-compliant and possibly paying for software you don't need. And the cloud, it only made things more complicated. Here at SAMexpert, we believe that it doesn't have to be like that. SAMexpert is a global, independent consultancy, a recognized leader in FinOps and Microsoft license management. We're on a mission to take the nonsense out of Microsoft licensing. Small business through to a multinational enterprise, we have your back. Over the last 20 years, our experts have helped organizations like Western Digital, IKEA, Capital One, Heathrow, Amdocs. We are driven by the passion to get things right, to make complex simple, to crack the frustrating licensing puzzles and help you personally take control. By joining forces with SAMexpert, you can be sure you are compliant. What's more, you'll get the best return on investment in Microsoft software and the cloud. Of course, if you're not worried about compliance and costs, there's no need to pick up the phone. But if you are, contact us today.